Hello. Welcome to North Country History with Rob Berg. And this is Rob. I will be your guide for the exploration of the forests of the Great Lakes here on the podcast. This week, we finish up our three-part episodes on the logging in the Northeast, and we will be talking today about Penn's Woods, logging in Pennsylvania in the 19th century. So sit back, settle in, and enjoy the show. North Country History with Rob Berg, your podcast on the forest history of the Great Lakes region. As I've mentioned in the previous two episodes, I took a vacation to the Northeast in October of this past year, in October 2024, and I visited some areas that were part of the early history of the lumber industry and forest history in the United States. We talked about Maine and the birth of the lumber industry there. Last week, the Adirondack Mountains in New York. And today, I want to talk a little bit about Penn's Woods in Pennsylvania, which literally translates to Penn's Woods, and the development of the industry in Pennsylvania, cutting mostly white pine, but also there was a large hemlock lumbering industry, hardwood, mostly for charcoal. For a long period. There were for smelting iron of the region, the local region there. You had places like Valley Forge. That was an early iron smelting area or iron producing area. Known more importantly for the American Revolution, but also places like Hopewell Furnace up in New York State. So this was something prior to the big booming iron industry in the Great Lakes in Michigan and Minnesota, a little bit in Wisconsin as well, that this was something that then would have been important in the East. So charcoal for that as well. But of course, also we're talking white pine, the eastern white pine. And for a time, after after Maine, Pennsylvania was the leading white pine lumber region until it was overtaken by Michigan. So today I want to talk a little bit about Pennsylvania based on my visit there, as I mentioned, in October of 2024. So Pennsylvania is kind of like Michigan in that there's a divide between the eastern and western parts of the state. In Michigan, the eastern part, the rivers flow to Lake Huron, and we're looking at the lower peninsula. And the western side, waters flows to Lake Michigan. In Pennsylvania, it's a little different. That you have going right through Pennsylvania is the Appalachian Mountains, and most prominently the Allegheny Mountains. If you've ever spent time in Pennsylvania, there's tunnels on the Pennsylvania Turnpike going through there, kind of around the areas of south of Johnstown, Pennsylvania, and south of Altoona. But that's the Allegheny Mountain, and that Allegheny Ridge, as it's called there. And that is the dividing line between the rivers that flow directly east into the Atlantic Ocean via the Chesapeake River, the Chesapeake Bay or Delaware Bay. And then the waters flowing west flow into the Allegheny and Monongahela rivers, and they flow to the Ohio River at the site of Pittsburgh, and that goes down to the Mississippi River and the Gulf of Mexico. So you have this divide, and you have pretty much two specific regions of logging, because at that time, of course, logging was based on the rivers and floating the logs and the finished lumber to the markets by water. So the earliest logging period in Pennsylvania would have been focused on the eastern part of the colony province of Pennsylvania, and that would have been through mostly the Susquehanna River, and then also the rivers that would have been tributaries of the Delaware River and flowing down, as I mentioned, into Delaware Bay. But for the large lumber industry that really took off in the late 1700s, the early 1800s, it was really focused on the Susquehanna River. And that is a large navigable river. And the biggest lumber center there on the Susquehanna River was quite a ways up in the town of, or city of Williamsport. And today, Williamsport, Pennsylvania is best known for as the home of the Little League World Series. If you're a lover of baseball, was a baseball player in your youth in the Little League, that was the ultimate goal. But for the 19th century, it was the home of the Susquehanna or Williamsport boom, large logging boom, where they, kind of excuse me, where they kind of corralled all of the logs, waiting to go down in or either organized rafts going to the mills lowered further down the river, or were putting into mills there, and then the the lumber rafts with the cut timber on there, going further down the river to Harrisburg, or right to the Chesapeake River, Chesapeake Bay. I won't get the geography correct on the east at all, but they're spreading along the Atlantic coast to other markets. So that was the first region of that, and it was quite important. The Williamsport boom would continue to be used from the 1850s up until 1909. And so I'm just mentioning that briefly for there, but let's go back to some basic information about the Penn's Woods, about Pennsylvania and the forest. This is coming from a DVD that I was able to pick up at the Pennsylvania Lumber Museum during my visit. And of course, I don't have the title of the DVD in front of me, but I'll have that in my my show notes with the podcast. But the total acreage of Pennsylvania is 28 million acres. And the amount of forest lands in Pennsylvania is 17 million acres, about 60%. And in modern period here, that is 4 million acres of that is publicly owned. And that would be either state forest, state parks, county or municipal owned, and then also national forest, the Allegheny National Forest making up a large chunk of that. And then the remaining 12 million acres are privately owned. Well, that comes to 16, so there's about 1 million acres that isn't mentioned in here. So that it probably is rounded numbers here. And at the time of the use, as I mentioned, there was the iron industry, and for charcoal use, or forest used for charcoal, was 3 to 3.5 million acres for the iron industry. And that a lot of it would have been hardwoods. So you had your oak, your maple, you had chestnut. The chestnut was huge in the east there along the Appalachian Mountains, and they were stately trees. We even had some in Michigan, but unfortunately they were decimated in the beginning of the 20th century by chestnut blight, and very few of those big trees survive anywhere. But 1820 was with the steam-driven saws. Sawmills were invented and introduced into the forest, not just in Pennsylvania, but throughout. And of course, white pine use, a lot of it was used for shipbuilding until the late 19th century. But of course, as we know from talking about it here in Michigan, the boom for home construction, really beginning about the 1830s, that actually started in Chicago, of all places, and that's what made Michigan important, was with the balloon frame house building that was created at that time. So the Susquehanna boom, 1850s in Williamsport, Pennsylvania, and operated to 1909, as I mentioned. and that was made from huge logs, piers or piles that were driven into the river, chained together with other logs to block any logs flowing down the river, and so where they could corral them based on their log marks that would have dated back to to Maine in the 1600s, marking the King's Broad Arrow on the ownership of that. But in the log booms, they would separate the logs by the log mark to the various owners, and that way they knew who would get paid for the lumber being cut from those logs. So that was very important with that. And then in the 1860s, so we're talking earlier than in Michigan, logging railroads were introduced, 1864. So there was aspirations by Michigan loggers to following this, how they could then move the logs. And of course, when I say Michigan, I'm really meaning the whole Great Lakes. I don't want to forget Wisconsin and Minnesota, and then Ontario as well. So these were, areas that were kind of revolutionized before they hit in the Great Lakes region. Pennsylvania was one of those leading places for that as well. Hemlock, of course, I mentioned too, was cut. And that was mostly for tanning. As I mentioned with the hemlock in the Adirondacks in last week's episode, is that the bark was stripped and was sent to tanneries to be made into leather. That, of course, leather was a very important industry used for various types of clothing, belts, shoes, would have been used for different types of bags, for carrying items, saddlebags, personal bags, cases, furniture, but also very importantly for transportation on your beasts of burden, your horses, oxen, mules, not only saddles, but also all of the harnesses, all made out of leather. So it was a very important industry in the 19th century. So hemlock and also oak would have been important too, but a lot of hemlock in the northeastern forests of the Appalachian Mountains and all throughout Pennsylvania and the other states as well. Like the rest of the lumber regions in Maine, other parts of New England, New York, and of course up in Canada and Quebec, New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, the men that were doing the logging, we know them colloquially as the lumberjacks today, but they were, loggers is their correct term, but they had their own local names too. In Michigan and the Great Lakes region, we tended to call them shanty boys because they lived in log shanties. But in Pennsylvania, they had a particular name just for themselves, and they called themselves woodhicks. And the woodhicks were certainly a very important group of young and older men during that time period. Just like everywhere else, they were of a wide variety of age, usually from mid to late teenagers up into their 30s and 40s for the most part. You didn't have too many men older than that. You aged quickly while you were working in the woods, just as they would anywhere else. And then, of course, you had particular men because the river drives were very important in Pennsylvania with the Susquehanna River and then the Allegheny River to the west. So the river drivers, the river hogs, river pigs would have been very important. And they would have had the same experiences as those in Maine. And when Joseph Peavy, that we mentioned 2 episodes ago, blacksmith in Stillwater, Maine, inventing his Peavy pole, would have really made it an easier job for them just as well. So logging, of course, was a quite important industry there. And so we talked a little bit about the Susquehanna side, but to get into the Allegheny side, jump across to the Allegheny Mountains, and you have the Allegheny River. And this was one of the 2 main sources of the Ohio River. It starts in Pennsylvania, and then it flows west and then north up into New York State, western New York, and then it curves and comes back down south into Pennsylvania, and then kind of flows again in kind of a southern and a little bit more to the west and southwest down to Pennsylvania, down to Pittsburgh, where it meets the the Monongahela River. That is a tough one to say. Coming up from the regions of West Virginia and meeting at Pittsburgh, and that is where they become the Ohio River. And so lumber coming from northwestern Pennsylvania would have come down to Pittsburgh and could either been used there or then sent down to the Ohio River and the growing territories of Ohio and Indiana and Illinois, but also with the states of, Western Virginia that in the 1860s became West Virginia, and Kentucky, and then eventually the Ohio, of course, meeting the Mississippi River. And outlet for that, or where they converge, is north of St. Louis, but just then a packet boat, steamboat up to St. Louis, and it opens to the west. So lumber from Pennsylvania, just like Michigan and the rest of the lakes, Great Lakes, also went to the west, not just to the east. And of course, to the Mississippi, it can also go south down to New Orleans eventually, and to the Gulf of Mexico that way as well. So this was very important for making Pennsylvania a leader in the lumber industry because it had two places for the lumber to go, not just one. Maine had just the one location going south to the Atlantic coast. New York had mostly going south to the Atlantic, or it could also go north and west to the Great Lakes, to either Lake Ontario or Lake Erie. But much of the lumber trade on that side was going east anyway. So very little of that would have gone further west because you had Pennsylvania with a small coast on Lake Erie, Erie, Pennsylvania. And then, of course, you have the Lake State lumber industry as well. So that was pretty much also centered on going south to the Atlantic Ocean, to New York City and the harbors there, and then spreading out through the rest of the Atlantic coast. And there would have been some international trade as well. But the northwestern Pennsylvania had large amount of pine. You had white pine in places growing, such as what's now the Allegheny Highlands there, and some of that is covered by Allegheny National Forest, though like all the national forests, they would have come later. Eastern National Forest did not begin to be created until the early 1900s. Many of them not until the 1920s and 30s, and in the 30s really developed by the Civilian Conservation Corps of planting pine plantations to kind of recover from what had happened a century or more before. But the driving through the Allegheny region there, much of that area, you're going to be part of what is called the Lumber Heritage Region of Pennsylvania. And the state of Pennsylvania, beginning in the 1990s, really embraced the use of heritage areas to kind of preserve and interpret the history, not just for tourism, but also for the local population, and making everybody kind of feel the importance of their location. And they have a number of heritage regions in Pennsylvania. I actually worked for a national heritage area in Pennsylvania in 1996 doing a graduate school internship. I was nowhere near the lumber heritage region. I had a little bit of a familiarity of it, but mine was a national one that was located in the Allegheny Mountains southwest part of the state, so directly south of the lumber heritage region. And lumber was not part of what we talked about. We talked about the Pennsylvania Canal, the Pennsylvania Railroad, and the coal mining and the iron industry, the steel making industry in Pittsburgh. So those were what we talked about. So the lumber region is everything connected to the lumber, not only the big mills. Williamsport is included in it, even though they're pretty far east for this region, but they're right at the edge. But going all the way back to the Alleghenies River and heading south towards Pittsburgh. So the lumber region was very important, and not only do they have the multi-county area there, but there's also the Pennsylvania Lumber Museum, and that was someplace I got to visit while I was there, and it's a great complex. They've got the main museum building, which has some fantastic exhibits. It's a relatively new building. The site has been around for quite a while, but their main building is new and has modern exhibits in there, has meeting rooms, has gifts, a museum store, and a lot of good, amenities for visitors. But then they also have a recreated sawmill on site, a steam-powered sawmill. They have a steam locomotive, a Shea locomotive that was invented in Michigan by Ephraim Shea, and we'll talk about that later in the season when we do a railroad logging episode. And then they have a recreated lumber camp, and they have regular demonstrations. The weekend I was there on October 12th, happened to have been my birthday, that they had the sawmill operating, and they had a team of horses skinning logs and had other demonstrations going on. There were actually men that were distilling birch oil, and birch oil was used for a lot of natural flavorings in the 19th century and to this day, although a lot of those have been replaced by artificial flavors now. But when I learned in Pennsylvania in 1996, is birch beer very popular. It's like root beer. It's a soft drink, a pop as we call it here in Michigan. But it was flavored with birch oil, and they extract the oil out of like twigs and small branches of birch trees, and would distill that into the liquid they would use then for the flavoring. And it was quite interesting to see that demonstration. And it was a way to use the forest after all the big forests were gone. Birch is a pioneer species that will pop up very quickly after all the larger trees, the canopy forest of the pine and other hardwoods are gone. And then birch, aspen, wild cherries, those come up very quickly. So this was a use for the birch. And there was quite a few areas in that north central part of Pennsylvania where they had birch distilling. And so there was a couple of guys doing that for the day, and it was quite interesting to see. But it was really cool to see the permanent sawmill they had operating there. Unfortunately, I missed the last cuts, but they still had the steam engine running. And so it was nice to see that for a little while. They had the saw spinning, but no more logs going through it. And they had a nice pond there that not only provided water for the mill, but also was a holding pond for logs. And they would just then drag the logs up out of the water on a chain conveyor, just like they would have done in a sawmill anywhere. So a great place to see. And that was just one place that I visited when I was out there in Pennsylvania. The second area was Cook Forest State Park, and that's located near Clarion, Pennsylvania. Clarion is right off of I-80 in western Pennsylvania, and you go up north of there for a little ways, about a half-hour drive, and you reach Cook Forest State Park. And it's on the Clarion River, and the Clarion River flows into the Allegheny River. But Cook Forest is important because it is one of the last stands of old-growth pine in the east. It's the largest one of over 600 acres. And I only discovered it when I was looking for where to go to on my trip. And I'd never even heard of Cook Forest from the time I worked in Pennsylvania almost 30 years before. So this was a great find. And I did a little bit of recording on there. Now, in my recording that I'm going to connect to here in just a second, I mentioned that the man who started it was Thomas Cook, and I was incorrect with his first name. He was actually John Cook. A stream that they put their first mill on and they used as a way to move the logs was Tom's Run, and so that's where I got confused. I thought they named the creek after Cook, but not correct. He was John Cook, and then his son Anthony Cook and grandson A.W. Cook that I mentioned in there as well. So I'm going to cut to the remote that I recorded at that time on October 13th. October 12th. I camped overnight on October 11th and explored the pines there, the forest on October 12th before I moved on. So here we will go to that. I am at Cook Forest State Park in northwestern Pennsylvania, and this is the site of one of the largest, if not the largest, old-growth white pine forests left in the United States. The old growth area is well over 600 acres, and it survives very much like the history at Hartwick Pine State Park in Michigan, in that it was an area that had been logged over, and there was a stand, or in this case, several stands that were never logged. And I think there were various reasons for that, but the Cook family, who owned the property, owned the land, going back to the 1820s, when the eldest Cook had looked at a potential of building a canal along the Clarion River, which is below the forest area. And when that did not happen, he ended up purchasing quite a few hundred acres. I think he purchased well over 600 acres to begin with. And he started logging the area, these large white pines, hemlocks, also a lot of hardwood forest in here, though just like in Michigan, the hardwood would not have been logged at this time. Certainly in the 1820s, 1830s, they would not have. But the pine was brought down, floated down a stream called Tom's Run, and it went down to the Clarion River there, where initially the logs were floated down then the Clarion River, which flows into the Allegheny River, and taken down the Allegheny River to Pittsburgh, where they were milled. And of course, Pittsburgh is where the Allegheny and the Monongahela rivers come together to form the Ohio River. So this could have been lumber that potentially went west, at least what was west at that time, down to Ohio and Indiana and Illinois, the areas of the old Northwest Territory, the first states that were formed out of that. Michigan was one of the later states. So this was an area that has immense trees. The largest white pines here initially were over 200 feet tall and well over 4 foot diameter. Today, the largest trees are up to about 170 feet tall and about 4 foot diameter. When the oldest Cook, I believe his name was Thomas Cook, passed, the land, much of it went to his son, Anthony Cook, who then continued the logging here, and it was really under him that the logging came to its maximum effort. He had his father and then him, they had established the community of Cooksburg down on the Clarion River where the Tom's Run comes into it at, and they had their houses down there. And Anthony Cook built sawmills, and it was at the mills then, not only were they floating logs then down the rivers, but they were also cutting timbers or cutting lumber and rafting the cut lumber down the Clarion and the Allegheny to Pittsburgh that way, having finished lumber then going that way. And they continue to do this well into through the 1800s. And Anthony Cook's son, Anthony Wayne Cook, inherited the land. And it was at the time period that lumber was dwindling in the area. And they had a large amount of old growth pine and hemlock that's still standing that they had not cut. And he was interested in creating a park. So he kind of kept it all off away from logging of the what they call the ancient forest here, the Forest Cathedral, another name for it, which is now a National Natural Landmark or Natural National Landmark. I'm not sure the wording on that. Designated by the Park Service in 1967, and it eventually became a park in 1926. A.W. Cook, Anthony Wayne Cook, really wanted to have this park created, and legislation was finally passed at that time for the creation of a state park here to protect the land. Now, the land had to be purchased. Anthony Wayne Cook did not donate the land to the park or for the park like Karen Hartwick did in Michigan with Hartwick Pine State Park, but a organization was created to raise money through subscriptions, and over $200,000 was raised to purchase the land, and the park was created. Many areas of the park was then developed during the New Deal, during the Great Depression. The Civilian Conservation Corps built campground, built different facilities, cabins for people to stay in, which are still in use today. I camped at the campground last night. It's a fantastic park. It's one of the gems that I was completely unaware of until about 6 months ago when I started planning a vacation out to the Northeast. So I'm going to enjoy a little bit more of the park. I haven't seen the Ancient Forest Trail yet, which goes through kind of the heart of the forest. But I'm up in an area where a cyclone or cyclonic winds, they called it, in 1956 came through and took out 4 acres of forest. And so it's a very open area with a lot of second growth coming up now, and you can still see the trunks of the ancient trees that had come down. I say ancient, they were 375-year-old forest. This is. So these were not, 500-year-old trees, but very old, mature white pine, that's for sure, old growth. And, they were weakening and in their later age, and were now susceptible to the strong winds. Well, I will carry on, and I will tune in again here. So what we have here at Cook Forest is one of the many, but the largest certainly of remnant white pine forests that survived the lumber industry. And, for various reasons, they were not cut. Either the market was changing, the type of the forest, or the forest lands were harder to get to, economic reasons, a variety of reasons. But like Hartwick Pines, Cook Forest survived, and it became a park. The park was, as I mentioned there, was pushed for by A.W. Cook, and he was the grandson of John Cook, the son of Anthony Cook, and the lumber industry was changing. And in the late 1800s, 1895, is when they kind of really started the forest reforestation efforts in Pennsylvania. Dr. Joseph Rothrock was named the first forestry commission, to the first Pennsylvania Forestry Commission, and he's considered the father of Pennsylvania forests. His strong leadership helped to push for the creation of state forests lands there, just like in Michigan a few years later, when reforestation would begin under Philbert Roth. Rothrock was a trained forester, just like his contemporary, also a native of Pennsylvania, Gifford Pinchot, who in 1905 would become the first director of the U.S. Forest Service under Theodore Roosevelt. So this was all happening around the same time. Pennsylvania was got a little bit of a jump start in this case, and they helped to start a Pennsylvania Forest Academy that Rothrock founded to train foresters in the state, and it was very important for that to kind of help to start replant these forests. And as I mentioned, then the Allegheny National Forest would be established, and that would, using under federal tutelage of Gifford Pinchot's U.S. Forest Service, they would start to replant the forest there as a forest reserve. This and state forests were the same thing. They were land to have lumber that could be harvested at a later date. And Pinchot, after his time in the federal government, he would come back to Pennsylvania and would eventually be elected governor of Pennsylvania. So Pennsylvania would still continue to be a leader in the conservation movement under Pinchot after he had led in the federal government for a while. So Pennsylvania's got a very important spot in the forest history. And like New York, you can say they're Great Lakes states because they do touch the Great Lakes, New York, Ontario, and Erie. And Pennsylvania has the small spot on Lake Erie in between New York and Ohio. But really, these were eastern states, and they were directed looking east and south to the Atlantic Ocean and the markets there. But what happened in these states, Maine, New York, Pennsylvania, directly impacted what would happen in the Great Lakes region in time to come. So this was an important part of the forest history of the Great Lakes, is to looking to see what happened previous. And so I'm glad that I was able to talk to you today about the lumber industry in Pennsylvania, and the previous 2 weeks to talk about in Maine and New York. And we will get back now to the Great Lakes in coming weeks. Next week, I am going to be talking about the forest fires and how they affected the region, and kind of the with the climate, and how that was directly affected by both logging and the wildfires that came afterwards. And so that will be the episode called Fire Follows the Axe. And that's based on a paper that I presented a couple of years ago at a professional conference that I attended. And I'm going to kind of follow up on that talk I did to the ALFAM, Association of Living History, Farm, and Agricultural Museums. And I never got that paper published for various reasons. I didn't publish it, but so that'll be, I'll talk about that in this episode coming up. So as always, if you enjoyed the episode, I want you to hit that like button. I want you to subscribe to the podcast if you can. Follow me on, not just on the podcast website, but on however you listen to podcasts. I'm on all the big ones: Apple, Spotify, iHeartRadio. So you can find me, and also YouTube and Facebook. But share it with others. If you enjoyed this, let people know. Tell me or tell them, hey, take a listen to this. If you love the outdoors, learn a little bit of the history of it. So I want to thank you for listening today, and stay tuned next week for the next episode of the North Country History Podcast with Rob Berg. And I am your guide to the forest history of the Great Lakes region. Thanks for listening, and tune in again next week. Bye. North Country History with Rob Berg is hosted, written, and produced by Rob Berg. Music is Crack o' Dawn, performed by Reveille, licensed through Soundstripe. Follow North Country History with Rob Berg on YouTube and on Facebook at Rob Berg, Environmental Historian.